Anger often presents itself as moral light, an instant certainty about fault and remedy. Seneca's De Ira on anger treats that impression as a misdirection. The essay frames anger not as a clarifying beam, but as a lens that warps scale, proportion, and motive attribution. In Seneca's construction, the essential question is not whether anger feels intense, of course it does, but whether it can reliably guide judgment in private life or public office. This episode examines the architecture of Seneca's case. It focuses on what he takes anger to be, the path by which it arises, and the disciplines he proposes for those in positions where temper carries power. The text belongs to a wider Stoic project that treats reason as a governing faculty and passions as movements that require scrutiny. Throughout, Seneca separates firmness from fury and associates the latter with theatricality, appetite, and error. The discussion that follows is descriptive rather than prescriptive. It situates the essay within mid-first century Roman politics, reconstructs the Stoic psychology operating underneath, and analyzes Seneca's program delay, composure, rehearsal of adversity, environmental curation, and penalty without malice as a coherent attempt to insulate action from agitation. It also addresses the familiar counterpoint, traditions that permit or even praise a measured, righteous anger. The portrait that emerges is less a manual of behavior than a constitutional draft for the inner life, a proposal that authority, whether over self or others, requires cool hands rather than hot certainty. Lucius Annaeus Seneca the Younger, c. 4 BCE, 65 CE, wrote De Ira as part of his early moral essays and addressed it to his older brother Novatus, later known, after adoption, as Lucius Junius Gallio Annianus. Scholars generally place composition in the 42nd CE, with many proposing Seneca's exile on Corsica, 41-49 CE, or the years immediately after his recall to Rome in 49 CE. The dedication to Novatus, rather than Gallio, suggests a date before his brother's adoptive name became standard in public life. The famous Gallio inscription from Delphi attests Novatus, Gallio, as proconsul of Achaia around 51-52 CE, which provides a helpful anchor for the chronology. The institutional backdrop matters. Seneca's career threaded through high politics. After recall, he became tutor and later advisor to Nero, who reigned from 54 CE. In such a world, anger was not a private inconvenience, but a public hazard. A magistrate's mood could color verdicts. A princeps's temper could reorder lives. Seneca's death in 65 CE, compelled after the exposure of the Pisonian conspiracy, cemented his reputation as a philosopher preoccupied with the costs of unruled power. De Ira should be read against that landscape. It is not a quiet tract written from pastoral remove. It is an intervention for administrators, judges, household heads, and imperial courtiers. The themes, delay, composure, separation of punishment from passion map directly onto contexts in which decisions carried legal and mortal consequences. The essay asks what happens when the computational faculty of judgment is replaced by the velocity of resentment. Seneca defines anger as a deliberate passion, not a mere startle. The Stoic psychology in the background distinguishes between involuntary first movements, the flinch, the heat in the face, the surge of pulse, and the assent that converts an impression into intention. Anger, on this view, begins when a mind endorses the impulse toward retaliation and judges it appropriate. The emphasis falls on that moment of endorsement. For Seneca, the wrong turn happens when appetite persuades reason to abdicate. This gives his central claim its force. Anger is a species of temporary madness. The word madness is not casual rhetoric. It marks a breakdown in the faculties that ordinarily check scale, motive, and proportion. Under anger, offenses are magnified, Motives are guessed at and then treated as facts. Penalties swell until they fit the mood rather than the measure of the case. The passion is theatrical, it favors display, noise, and the savor of imagined victories. In that sense, anger imitates authority while hollowing out the procedures that make authority legitimate. A recurring insistence follows. Firmness does not require fury. Sanction, correction, and boundary. Setting can be administered under the governance of reason. Seneca's courtroom and household examples make the point vivid. A judge who rages misjudges. A parent who erupts teaches fear more than understanding. A magistrate who indulges wrath risks turning public penalty into private spectacle. The presence of anger, he argues, does not purify action. It contaminates it. Behind the argument stands a Stoic moral physics. The good aligns with reason. Virtue consists in ordered powers. The world has a rational structure that human beings can partially mirror. Passions are not denied as phenomena, but they are denied jurisdiction. The wise, in this account, do not become stone. They maintain a hierarchy in which impressions are heard and then ruled upon. The governing image is constitutional, a polity of the self in which reason holds office and refuses to be overthrown by grievance. Seneca's thesis, therefore, approaches absoluteness. Where other traditions ask for the right anger in the right amount, Seneca suggests that even measured doses corrode the very capacities attention, proportion, due process on which justice depends. The essay's anti-anger stance is not only declarative, it is procedural. Its recommendations, taken analytically, form a system designed to slow time, widen perspective, and separate adjudication from appetite. 1. Delay as institutional and psychological safeguard. Seneca returns to delay with the regularity of a refrain. Time functions as solvent. Physiological arousal declines. The narrative that felt self-evident a moment ago becomes one account among several. Other witnesses and facts can enter. The logic is both psychological and civic. Psychologically, anger's intensity decays with time. Civically, time opens a space for contrary voices. In courtrooms and councils, delay protects against charismatic volatility. The procedure aims not at indecision, but at proportion, at the chance that the decision-maker will be governed by reasons rather than the immediacy of offense. 2. External composure as feedback mechanism. The text also treats posture, voice, and facial expression as levers. Lowering the voice, unsetting the jaw, and softening the gaze are described not as etiquette, but as techniques of regulation. Seneca anticipates, in his own idiom, the modern notion that body and mind are coupled systems. The outward display can amplify or dampen the inward state. Anger sculpts a mask. Altering the mask can interrupt the script. The proposal implies that public actors, judges, patrons, heads of households serve as thermostats for the temperature of a room. Composure does not conceal truth. It stabilizes conditions under which truth can be sought. 3. Rehearsal of adversity. Premeditatio. A further pillar is rehearsal. Ordinary frictions, delays, insults, losses are treated as predictable. By prefiguring them, Seneca attempts to remove the element of surprise, which he considers an accelerant of anger. When expectations are brittle, every departure feels like a moral violation. When expectations are calibrated, disruptions shrink from injustice to event. The method is epistemic. By normalizing turbulence, the mind downgrades the interpretive leap that carries frustration into indignation. This is less pessimism than traffic control for appraisal. 4. Moral ecology and the curation of influences. Seneca is alert to what might now be called the political economy of attention. Environments that reward scorn generate incentives for public anger. Companions who trade in provocation cultivate private volatility. The recommendation to limit such inputs is an environmental design principle. Place the mind where outrage is not constantly profitable. Character, in this picture, is porous. Habits are contagious. The essay, therefore, embeds individual ethics in a social surround. 5. Punishment without anger. The physician analogy. One of Seneca's most striking images reframes penalty as a medical act. The physician cuts, cauterizes, and prescribes without personal hostility. The aim is the health of the whole. By extension, the magistrate or household head should correct without wrath. The analogy accomplishes several things at once. It narrows the legitimate aims of punishment to deterrence, reform, and protection. It discredits payback as a motive, and it subjects penalty to standards external to the punisher's mood. Anger, by contrast, is portrayed as an appetite for spectacle, an urge to make someone feel what one has felt. The physician image replaces theatre with function. 6. The pivotal moment of assent. At the heart of Stoic psychology lies the concept of assent, the mind's yes to an impression. Seneca's anti-anger strategy concentrates on this hinge. Heat in the body is not yet anger. A story about injury is not yet policy. The decision to endorse retaliation is the step that changes category. The program's elements, delay, composure, rehearsal, curation, are all designed to interfere at that hinge and keep the act of consent within the jurisdiction of reason. 7. Rhetorical architecture as training. De Ira is itself a tool. Its style aphorisms, sharp contrasts, moral portraits, works to deflate anger's glamour. The vice is not given the dignity of tragic force. It is drawn as noisy and slightly ridiculous, a counterfeit authority that shouts because it cannot argue. Examples of emperors and judges illustrate cost rather than catharsis. In that sense, the essay performs what it recommends. It slows heat with structure and replaces spectacle with analysis. 8. Political asymmetry and harm reduction. A final strand is tacit but important. Roman institutions were hierarchical. If anger is normalized among the powerful, the vulnerable absorb the impact. Seneca's refusal to license even small anger looks less austere when read as harm reduction in asymmetrical systems. The fewer decisions taken under the reign of rage, the fewer collateral sufferers. The argument, therefore, extends beyond private ethics into public safety. Taken together, these elements present a coherent constitution. Slow the clock, widen the lens, quarantine appetite, and let reasons not moods carry force. Agreement or disagreement with the Stoic baseline aside, the design is precise. The sharpness of Seneca's line invites comparison with traditions that allow a narrow lane for anger. An Aristotelian analysis, for example, entertains a doctrine of the mean. Anger can, in principle, be rightly measured at the right object, in the right amount, for the right duration, under the governance of virtue. In some religious and legal frameworks, indignation at cruelty appears not only permissible, but fitting, a signal that a boundary has been crossed. Seneca doubts the reliability of such calibration. He treats anger as chemically expansionary. Once admitted, it tends to exceed proportion. The disagreement thus has two layers. Empirically, it asks whether human agents reliably contain anger within narrow channels. Conceptually, it asks whether anger's nature already tilts toward excess, such that containment changes its identity. Seneca answers both in the negative. He prefers what might be called cool resolve, a steady, non-hostile commitment to correction and protection. There are tensions worth noting. Seneca writes from proximity to power. His physician analogy may sound reassuring to those who punish and less convincing to those punished within systems later judged harsh. The text's aspiration to fair-minded penalty sits within Roman structures that modern readers evaluate critically. Yet, this does not dissolve his point about procedure. If the goal is proportionate adjudication, then passion, as spectacle, is a bad instrument. The debate remains live. Is a world entirely without anger desirable or even humanly available? De Ira stakes its answer and supplies a mechanism. Alternative accounts accept a managed spark. The evaluative criteria differ. The shared concern is damage control. Viewed as a whole, On Anger is a design for governance of self and, by implication, of institutions. It assumes that reason is a limited but real capacity, that passions are powerful and prone to overreach, and that justice requires procedures that survive the first flash. The essay's distinctive contribution lies in its absolutism about anger, not diminished, not domesticated, excluded from jurisdiction. Whether that posture reads as wisdom or overcorrection will depend on prior commitments about emotion's role in moral life. What the text offers with clarity is a consistent program. Slow the moment, cool the setting, keep adjudication under reasons that can be examined, and resist the theatre of retaliation. Read in its Roman context, the program has an institutional edge. Read in a broader philosophical context, it proposes a standard for dignity in the face of provocation. As a document of Stoic ethics, De Ira remains precise, argumentative, and intentionally cool, an architecture meant to outlast the heat that first provoked it.